So for the intrinsic muscles of the foot, there are a bunch, and I'm not going to hold you to trying to remember all of these. The biggie that we've talked about in the beginning of class, and even in the beginning of this session in the first video, was specifically all of these little itty bitty muscles articulate and help in fine motor coordination. That fine motor coordination, whether it's walking, jumping, biking, swimming, throwing, catching, whatever it is, all have their place and begin at the base. A little bit different with swimming, right? Because you're kicking and using your arms to help propel you through the water. But land-based activities, all of these muscles all have to work together to help stabilize. And we felt this and we saw this when we did the drills in class in the weight room, where we stood on the balls of the feet, we fell into each other's shoulders fell into each other's hands to the side, etc. And we felt the articulation and the weight transfer from the medial side to the lateral side of the foot. And even when we went from flat-footed up to the ball of the foot and we pushed through the big toe, first digit, if you will, first metatarsal, we felt that weight transfer. But that weight transfer happens, and what keeps us from falling over are these muscles in here. And please, don't try to memorize all of them, not for this class. Again, if you become a podiatrist, God bless you. You can memorize these inside and outside. I want you to understand there's a ton of them in here, and they all work together to help stabilize. And when you look at the plantar side of the foot, the book does a pretty good job. I think that's on page 306. I got to look back real quick. Actually, it's page 320. I'm not sure I got 316 or 306 from, but 320, and they pull back layer by layer the different layers of the feet. So when you look at like reflexologists and you look at what they do, at first blush, they're working on and massaging the soles of the feet, and their philosophy is this. You have different meridians in the body, and the meridians in the body are affected by different areas in the feet. So if they work on different areas, perhaps if you're working different musculature in here, it's going to help you with some particular organ function. Now, I've had reflexology. I can tell you it hurts like hell as they dig their bony little fingers into those muscles, but I can tell you there's something to be said for the release that you get from the musculature in the feet. And I can also tell you that I use, and I brought it up in class, I use those foot wakers, those half dome little wakers with the nubs on the top to massage my feet, to work some of the kinks out of my feet. Especially true when I'm in kind of a running phase and I'm using the musculature on the plantar side of my feet a ton to catch my body weight with every stride. These guys take a beating, so I definitely work them, and I make it a point to take care of them. And let's go next slide. I blew this up for you so you can see the different muscles in there and get an idea where everything is in the first layer, the second layer. And here's, you can see this tendon of flexor digitorum longus. Remember I mentioned that comes down around the ankle and wraps into the feet, and it causes the foot to invert, right? As you pull and contract that muscle. So get an idea of what's going on here tendon-wise as that comes down into the subtendons, down into the toes, into the metatarsals. Third layer and fourth layer, the book again takes you a little bit further. They go into, and I'll open this up so you can see it better. You can kind of see the actual tendinous type feet material that is used in here to connect. You can also see the ligaments down in here that are a little bit deeper into the foot and the ankle, which is great. But again, I'm not going to hold you to that. Just realize when you look at this, the intricacy of the foot and all the musculature that happens between the four different layers that allow you to articulate the metatarsals as well as the ankle. With the intrinsic muscles of the foot, I'm going to kind of breeze through this because you're not going to be quizzed on it. Let's just take a quick peek here. Now with ankle dorsiflexion, I hit on this a little bit earlier. You have tibialis anterior, number one. Extensor digitorum longus comes down. 1, 2, 3, 4, right? So it's fourth, actually number 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 metatarsals. Fibularis, it's terratus, comes down to the pinky metatarsal. And then you have extensor hallucis longus comes down to the big toe. So when you do dorsiflexion, you contract this muscle complex. Think this through now in terms of what's happening, right? Your digitorum are working the 4 digits. Notice as you look through these, you have now this new word, hallucis, hallucis longus. Hallucis comes down to the toe. So like in the hand, you had the 4 digits, and then you had the thumb. I'll hit this on the next slide, but realize there's a bit of a carryover from one to the other. What I want to get a little bit further into is this. When you look at dorsiflexion, right, we had those muscles, tibialis anterior, represented here, extensor digitorum longus, right, fibularis tetratus, and extensor hallucis longus. So with running technique, and I know I hit on it in class, you have the musculature that's up front in the shin, and this is actually a great time to just talk about shin splints real quick. Remember I said you can have that medial side, that bony side, which is the tibia, and you got this beefy muscular side, super developed on this athlete right here. But you have this beefy muscular side, and oftentimes shin splints will fall into one of 2 different categories. Either they're painful, or they're in pain over here, or your client's in pain over here. If they're in pain over here, it's soft tissue. Over here on the tibia itself, it's a different story. So just bear in mind, you can break this out into 2 different types of shin splints. Now with running technique, where it becomes important is you have to have your people understand that this muscle complex up front that does dorsiflexion has to be strong. Otherwise, they'll have a drop foot, and every time their foot hits the ground, they're going to slam their toes into the front of the shoe, what's called the toe box, and they're going to end up with shin splints because they're breaking with every single step. The ability to go from this toe up position to toe down on the ground yields you about 15% of your speed, and this is oftentimes missed by coaches teaching speed development, but it's that active application of force into the ground that allows you to have greater yield out of the ground. So just think this through as this video runs, how this, and this are all contracting. As this athlete brings their heel up to high knee position, now it's toe down, now it's toe up. I want to point out too, when they toe down, there's a little bit of inversion, eversion, supination, and also a little bit of rotation in terms of internal, external rotation. So if we play this back, you can even see it here, a little bit of toe out position, external rotation, that's tibia. Yep, toe down, toe up, toe down, toe up. And notice on this one, it's toe up. If you're a coach watching somebody running technique, you can literally see that white little part of the shoe. Whereas if they do it incorrectly, you'll see this, you'll see the laces. You don't ever want to see the laces in high knee toe up position. You'd much rather see the tip of the shoe, boom, right there. And now big toe. And that last part was where, if you recall in class, whoop, I'll let that play out and I'll try to stop it appropriately. Flat footed, toe up, toe down, flat footed, now toe, and boom. So in plantar flexion here, pushing big toe into the ground, dorsiflexion here, dorsal fin to the shin, toe up here. So with this, the anterior chain is being worked a ton to go up in toe up position. So these 4 here are going to toe up position. Meanwhile, down here, your gastroc, soleus, and other in the posterior complex are firing to go toe down position. So running and walking, especially sprinting, really, when you look at this, it's a transition from toe up to toe down, toe up to toe down, loading the muscles on the back of the leg, contracting these to be able to pull a toe up. You know from reciprocal inhibition allows the posterior side to be fully extended, so it's fully loaded and has a ton of potential energy in it. And then when you strike the foot into the ground, you're contracting the posterior aspect or the posterior side of the lower leg, and you're delivering force into the ground. So it's this constant toe up, toe down, preloading the calf, unloading the calf into the ground. It's a cycle. It's a cyclical nature. It goes over and over and over between the musculature on the front side and the back side of the body. Hopefully that helps kind of, when we show those videos of Usain Bolt sprinting, you can see some of that transition right from that toe up to toe down position. And look at that guy, what an athlete. Oh. All right, so plantar flexion, which was the down leg when we push through the big toe. I mentioned this earlier, when you look at the 2 biggies, that's gastroc and soleus, and check them out, right? So you have number 1, number 2. Gastroc originates on the femur. Soleus does not, and as I mentioned, that's a test question all day long. So when you look at this, in the book, the notes, if you'd like to work gastroc versus soleus, there has to be a change in the knee angle to make that happen. And same thing for stretching. When you look at tarsal and subtalar inversion, that type of movement, you can kind of see what's going on with the ankle kind of coming inward here. And I'm not going to quiz you too much on this one, but I just wanted you to see that these are the two muscles, tibialis anterior and tibialis posterior. And notice how anterior and posterior both work together in that movement pattern. And one is on the anterior side of the body, the other is on the posterior side of the body. They both come down. This attaches in here. This guy attaches more on the medial side of the foot, but a little more proximal. So with this subtalar eversion, when I look at those two, the peroneus and the fibularis longus and the fibularis brevis, number 1 and 2, comes down, wraps, attaches in here a little more in this area, right? And kind of see where he comes across in the foot. And then you have fibularis brevis, who begins a little bit lower. Always, if there's a longus, there's a brevis. He comes down around the ankle, around that malleoli, and attaches down on the side of the foot. So see the difference on that? And if we go a little bit further, you have fibularis teres, or digitorum longus. And this would be the point where you can kind of put these together, right? And you look at, okay, fibularis longus and brevis both wrap around the posterior aspect of the lateral malleoli. Okay, cool, got it. The other two run a little bit more anterior, right? So this guy and this guy. And if you look at the verbiage here and you think of the hand, let's go back to that, right? In terms of, okay, tertius, and then you have longus. All right, and I talked a little bit about that previously. And the next slide, when we talk about it, you look at like hallucis longus. Well, the thumb was pollicis. Digitorum, we use that for the number 2, 3, 4, and 5 metacarpals, but you also use that for 2, 3, 4, 5 metatarsals. So digitorum can be both the hand and the foot, whereas hallucis and pollicis are specific to the hand or the foot. And I wish it was as simple as hallucis hand and pollicis big toe, but it's not. Hallucis is the foot, the big toe, whereas pollicis is the hand. Perhaps you could use pollicis and just think palm. Maybe that'll help your cause there, but just realize there will be a test question on this to match correctly. I left this down here just to kind of drink this in, this kind of hallucis and pollicis and digitorum. Notice, digitorum longus comes down and you have the second, third, fourth, and fifth. So digitorum tells you it's the digits. When you get into hallucis, 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 he comes down onto the big toe. Let you drink that in for a second. Moving on. Now, I mentioned a couple of these in the previous slides, and usually it's a flexibility thing. Usually it's a training thing. Sometimes you get into like early season track and people come back, they're hobbling around shin splints, or some people come back early season football. The grass is really dry, the field is dry, it's like you're running on concrete and cleats, and it's a little bit just of an impact thing. So the part of this is rest, ice, compression, elevation. Part of it is making sure you're nice and strong in the shins, tibialis anterior to be specific, that anterior component of the lower body. And the other part of it is you might have to do a little massage therapy on the shins just to make to provide a little bit of rehab. So it's not an exact science, but you're going to, in your practice, going to have people come in with some type of shin issue or foot issue or ankle issue. And usually the big three are the ones I mentioned earlier. Keep in mind, with walking, you have one foot always on the ground. With running, there is a point where you have a flight phase where neither foot is on the ground. And then with sprinting, as you saw in some of the videos when we compared running to sprinting, you have a greater force production, greater force application, greater force yield, and that all happens through the feet. And there's a greater flight phase. So mechanically and force-wise, as you're going through a greater flight phase, you have to catch a higher degree of your body weight. Still same body weight, but the forces are exponentially higher. And that doesn't happen overnight. You got to make sure you train your people correctly. All right, guys, have a good one. Thanks.